Talks. So thank you so much for coming out today. If you haven't guessed, my name is Stephen Mejia. I'm with Friends of Los Angeles River. You probably all received annoying emails from me over the course of the last few weeks, probably the last few months, regarding sort of this policy talk we're doing today. As I referenced in the email, if you didn't sort of read through every sentence, but really every month and almost every week, we're constantly in conversations with different stakeholders around what's going on in Los Angeles, especially in regards to the LA River, as it connects to transportation, housing, habitat, biodiversity, water quality, you name it. There's any number of issues that are linked to the LA River, and so we wanted to begin a series that would begin to open up those conversations out to the public, to kind of let you listen in to what those conversations are discussing, and also to get a chance to sort of highlight some of our other wonderful partners who are doing this. It's obviously not just us, there are many other organizations that are involved in this, and we're thankful that they're allowing us sort of their voice and their expertise and their time. So I'm going to go around and they're going to introduce themselves, but just please, first of all, give yourselves a round of applause for coming out on a Thursday. In the middle of a Thursday, it's warm out. So just really quickly, logistics. The Snack Shack is open, so if you want to purchase anything there, you're more than welcome to. There's water and whatnot. The restrooms are in the back. They were just cleaned, so I promise they're okay. Cool, yeah. I mean, for what they are, yeah. They're good restrooms. Right. So there's hand sanitizer there, so that's great. And let me see. The other thing is, if you do need to leave, feel free. We're probably going to have quite a few people trickling in throughout the event. If you do need to step away for a moment to take a call or whatnot, feel free. There's a lot of space back there. But if you go onto the bike path, please take note of the giant A-frame that says "Stop, look both ways," because this is an active path, and so we do have a lot of bicyclists using the trail at the end of the day. We do have some walkers and runners as well. So just want you to be mindful of sort of our setting, as well as the fact that we have this beautiful river to enjoy over on the other side. So just be mindful of your surroundings. If you have any questions, feel free to ask some of the other staff here. And actually, if I could just have the staff raise their hand really quickly. So we have several FoLAR member staff here. Liliana's in the back. Galina is here. And where's Melissa? She's back there, okay. Ivana is wonderfully staffing the Snack Shack for us, so thank you, Ivana. And then hopefully you'll get a chance to see Melissa as well. So with that, I think we should just go ahead and get right to it. So I think we'll start over on this end, and so please just use the microphone as well. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. It's really great to be with all of you on this very sunny afternoon. I'm Melissa. I'm the Watershed Programs Manager at Los Angeles Waterkeeper. And really our mission is all about protecting and restoring our region's waterways when it comes to through enforcement and field work and community action. So we have a litigation team that works on enforcing the Clean Water Act. We also have a marine team that works on reconnecting communities with coastal environments and protecting our coastal ecosystems. And then we also have our watershed program, which is what I'm working on and have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about today. Really, we work on trying to empower or co-power fellow Angelenos in monitoring and stewarding our shared environment. So when it comes to the LA River, as well as some of our other regional waterways. And we think this is so important as we work toward living in healthy and accessible and safe waterways. So in that way, we have a lot in common, I think, with fellow attendees here, and really excited to be with all of you. Oh, and I just wanted to add, has anyone heard of the Waterkeeper Alliance? Okay, great. I'm also here as a representative of Waterkeeper Alliance. We're one of about 300 organizations around the world, and jointly we're working on, or working toward a mission of swimmable and fishable and drinkable waterways around the world. So thank you so much. Looking forward to talking with all of you.
Hi everybody, my name is Sophie Parker, and would anyone like to wear my hat? Lady, would you like my hat? Yeah, here you go. I can't stand to see people in pain. And I know that pain.
Another hat. Thank you. Does anybody want my tie?
I don't think there's much shade to begin with.
Can I keep it? That's great.
I can tell you where to get one. But I'll sound like an advertisement. So my name is Sophie Parker. I work for the Nature Conservancy. My job at the Conservancy is a senior scientist, and what that means is I get to provide science leadership and support to the projects that the Conservancy has in Southern California. I've been with the organization for 9 years now. It's a not-for-profit organization that was started in 1951, and we work in all 50 states and in 30 countries around the world. But locally, here in the California chapter, we have an urban strategies program, and as part of that program, we're thinking about and planning for some habitat enhancement and stormwater capture on the Los Angeles River. And I can talk a little bit more about the details of what that entails and what that means, but it's a real pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Hello, my name is Marcos Trinidad, and I'm really happy to be here. And I am from Audubon, California. I'm the center director of Audubon Center at Debs Park, which I was trying to say, I'm like, no, we can't really see it from here, but we can. It's not that far from here. It's at Ernest E. Debs Park. It's a 282-acre park. It's open space. It's over in Highland Park. I've been there for about 3 years, but before that I've been with a local Audubon chapter out in Palos Verdes, South Bay. But I was directing a youth program that was serving youth all over Los Angeles, and I guess closer to here, we had a couple of projects down on the LA River, which Stillhead Park, I'm sure a lot of you guys know of. And, you know, a little bit about the center. It was one of the first centers that the Audubon Society had built in an urban environment. And the idea was to be able to bring a resource to a neighborhood and connect the neighborhood to some of the local treasures that we have. So today we are doing that and taking a little different approach by actually being able to invite community in to really work the organization from within. I was born and raised in Highland Park. My folks actually met down the street from Debs Park on 43rd and Griffin at the bus stop. It was probably the last time they had taken the bus. But, you know, they were, here we are. So, you know, for me, being able to talk about the LA River and do it in an area that is really special to me. I mean, I used to play on the river. I mean, my folks actually used to tell me, you better not be in that river. Because it was different. It was very, very different. It wasn't constructive play or out, you know, going with binoculars like I am here with my kids. It was a little different, but it was still what really helped shape, you know, myself into being able to do what I'm doing today. So it's great to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
I'm Andy Schrader. I work for Los Angeles City Council member Paul Koretz, and I've been lucky enough to handle environmental policy for Councilmember Koretz since 2012. I get to take all the good work that these folks are doing and try to turn it into city policy. Councilmember Koretz has been focused on a lot of outdoor urban wildlife, native plant, those kind of policies lately. And we got past a wildlife corridor motion to try to allow, you know, P22 to get out of Griffith Park and his fellow animals so they can stop interbreeding and you know, rejoin the rest of the living world. We also did a rodenticide motion to try to get the city departments to stop using rodenticides because, again, P22 got I actually worked for P22, not Councilmember Koretz, because he got sick from rodenticides. And so we've successfully got the city off of second generation rodenticides, and now we're working on first generation. And then Councilmember Koretz and I really realized that we were working under a greater umbrella of biodiversity, and we introduced and got approved a couple months ago a biodiversity motion where we're going to basically adopt a city index, which is to count and catalog all the biodiversity in the city, all the animals, all the plants, and figure out ways to protect them in all city aspects, and figure out what that means in a city like Los Angeles. And one of the great things about the LA River is, from a wildlife corridor point of view, if we rip out the concrete, suddenly we have this giant wildlife corridor, and rich with biodiversity, and so we're really excited to see what can come of that. And glad to be here, and thank you, FoLAR, for hosting what's the beginning of a series, right?
Yep.
So come here every...
Well, the park spot's open every weekend, and hopefully we're going to be hosting these. Sorry. I have trouble adjusting my voice after I've just been yelling into the wind. So, can everyone hear? Did everyone be able to hear? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so we'll be hosting more of these discussions. Right now, they're scheduled for every other month. We have, it just takes a little time to sort of plan them and put them together and make sure that sort of everyone's available. As you can imagine, it takes actually not much effort to coordinate these people that are incredibly busy working in their respective fields. So we'll try to have them every other month. They are going to be topical. So just keep an eye out for more annoying emails from me. You can unsubscribe if you want, or stay tuned to sort of find out more. So I guess one of the questions that I think we were talking about at the beginning of how many different conversations we potentially have when it comes to, you know, the title of the forum is on urban ecology, right, and bringing the river back to life. And I think it would be great for us to just sort of begin with the why. You know, why are we talking about nature? Why are we talking about urban nature, urban ecology, urban ecosystems? There's so many different ways we can reference it. But I think it would be great to sort of hear some thoughts on, you know, why is this important now in the face of sort of all these other social issues that we're dealing with, all these political issues that we're dealing with. You know, what's important about why is it important to have this discussion?
Have this discussion to open up the river.
Yeah, this is for anyone.
You know, right now we've got a situation, let's call it a situation, in DC that is sort of the opposite of what we're doing here. It's kind of like putting concrete over the whole planet and charging for parking. So I think it's really important that Los Angeles, the city that's known for its freeways and concrete jungle and you know, conspicuous consumption, is suddenly the poster child for urban wildlife with P22. Like, the whole world knows about this mountain lion, and I think he really kind of kicked off a whole interest in the city in urban wildlife and in wildlife connectivity and a healthy ecosystem. You know, a lot of people talk about we need to protect and save P22, but I think he's here to save us and really turn Los Angeles from a city of the past into a city of the future that's really forward-thinking. And opening up the river is so important for so many ways. You know, it creates a giant park in a lot of the park-poor regions of the city, so people can suddenly go walk over and have open space. And it creates a connective, you know, sort of bicycle freeway that goes all the way through the city, so bicyclists can go wherever, right on cue. That's one of my friends. Cue the bike. So people can just ride through the city. And the more people that are riding through the city, the more people we get off the freeways, the more we can reduce our greenhouse gas impact. And it's just a good symbol for everything we really need to do if, talking about climate change, we're actually going to get to the place we need to get to keep the planet not only habitable but thriving.
You know, I just hearing, you know, urban nature, or just listening to a lot of discussions on it. One thing that that we're really trying to do when we talk about urban nature, or just talk about Los Angeles, is change the narrative that is happening. Because really, when you go and you talk about LA again, as Andy was saying, you're not, the first thing that pops up is not nature. So when it comes to the LA River, I like to look at it as there's life that has always existed here, and even with birds and the way that we look at it. When I think of P22, he knew where it was going to be happening, and it just so happened he was able to get all the I guess the fame from it. But as a child coming out here and seeing what was happening, or just how we were able to interact with space, it is very different today, where we have a bike path and where folks feel comfortable bringing their families. So the importance of being able to congregate around a space like this, Elysian Park, all these other areas, it's really a gem. And the importance to be able to look at these spaces as a resource, I think is really what is driving a lot of the organizations and just community, because now we can really highlight some of the treasures we have. It's just there's so many other issues with mobility, with housing, affordable housing, all these things that start to come up that play a role in that. And I think for us to be able to look at the science and for, speaking of, with Audubon, what do? We go out and we look at birds, and we're able to tell a story. And with birds, you can tell a story that I think is very meaningful, because birds are probably the one animal that you see every day, that anyone in the city can see, aside from pets. So when we're able to make this connection, and the fact that you can tell the health of a community just off of the birds that are present in that community, I think is a really amazing story that hasn't been told often. So with us being able to use this waterway and tell the history of this waterway, I think is a vital piece in that.
So I want to talk a little bit about urban ecology and what the word ecology means. It has different meanings for different people, but from a science perspective, you can define ecology as the interactions between organisms and between organisms and their environment. So it's the study of those interactions. And as an ecologist, my background is in soil and plant and ecosystem ecology and microbial ecology. And what I know from my studies is that there are organisms everywhere. There are organisms even in the cleanest of clean rooms, in the cleanest, highest tech facility you can find. It is almost impossible to eliminate all life. And that gives me great, great hope. It just depends on what life is there, and that is driven by those interactions between that environment and those organisms. And so when Marcus was saying there was always life here, there was always life along the Los Angeles River, that's true. There even if you didn't have a lot of birds in the past, you would have had microbes, you would have had other organisms. And so when we're thinking about the ecology of an urban area, every place has ecology. And in thinking about urban ecology, you're just looking at the interactions of the organisms within an urban context. So there's no good ecology and bad ecology. There's just the study of the place as it is. And when thinking about urban ecology, there's this pretty recent history of studying wild organisms in an urban space and trying to understand those interactions. And it's big animals like mountain lions, and it's smaller organisms like the fish in the Los Angeles River, or the birds that live in the trees that are growing in the Los Angeles River, or even as small as some tiny terrestrial snails that are still living in these little pockets around Los Angeles. And we're just beginning to understand our city from that perspective of what organisms are here, what their patterns are in terms of where they're found, their biogeography, those patterns of how they are using the space, and what we can do to change this environment to invite them back in to places where we'd like them to be. They have already come uninvited, and they will continue to come uninvited as they adapt to this urban environment, but we can help them along by doing certain things, by adding certain plants, by adding combinations of a particular type of environment, particular types of plants. And so that's the study of habitat enhancement in an urban system. It's relatively new. It's really exciting. This is probably one of the places that's ground zero in the world for this type of work. So it's a really great time to be focused on this.
I agree. It's very exciting, especially as we think about joining in right now on a global conversation about urban rivers, and something that maybe has been thought as an oxymoron for a long time, especially in Los Angeles. I think it's also important to be having this conversation right now because there's a lot more work to do. And I think all of you here remind me of the importance of community input and processes going forward, especially in terms of what we'd like to see for the entire river, for the entire watershed, for all of our river systems in the region. And I think that that increasing the connection between community and between the environment and recognizing how there are benefits that go between the two, instead of viewing the two of those as separate in planning processes, will be really important moving forward. And a term we hear a lot is access. And I think the way I'm thinking of it today, in terms of the importance of access and the importance of talking about it, is not only in terms of accessing the physical space of a river, but also access to tools and trainings and resources, knowledge, scientists like Sophie, who can help us to understand how we can move forward. Because it's true we have incredible biodiversity here, and it's true we had even more incredible biodiversity in the past, perhaps. And there are many ways we could move forward, and all of your voices are very important as we do so. So I think that's why it's very important that we have this conversation now, because there's a lot of fantastic work that you've heard about and a lot more that we can do to connect communities with the environment, both at the LA River and throughout all of our region's water systems.
So we can continue from right there. I think we'll get into the conversation, the question section a little bit later, Mark. Did you have something in particular for one of them, or more of a general?
Terrible memory, so I like to ask questions right away. I'll try to.
If you could. If not, more than welcome to write it down. I think it's important to sort of highlight the expertise that we have here because of, as I mentioned, there's so many different opportunities to, I would say, get involved, but they're not always very transparent. It's not always very clear what input the community can have in these processes. So I think it would be great to hear kind of what, what are those opportunities, or what do we see as sort of the challenges in getting that community voice represented and part of this process, not just in terms of, as you're saying, access, but actually participating in the process of making our city more sustainable, essentially.
Okay. I think...
I don't know if everybody heard that question. Okay. No, it's okay. I'd rather
How do you get involved?
How do you get involved, and what mechanisms exist or maybe don't exist? What opportunities can we create in order to have better community involvement?
Sure. I think there are many different ways for community members to get involved, and actually I learned this from Stephen. We've had conversations of a spectrum of community involvement, ranging from just informing the public to asking for input, and eventually to actually empowering community members to help with decision making. And right now I feel that there are some opportunities to have your voice heard as part of meetings, but that could be even improved a bit. To the point that, for instance, in the Yarra River watershed in Australia, there was a river planning process recently where community members actually were part of the policy planning process and had a say in what the legislation would say. So that's another level beyond which we have now and which we could work toward as well. And I think from LA Waterkeeper's perspective as well, we really try to provide resources in terms of water quality monitoring trainings, bioassessment trainings, ways to connect community members with the science, learn firsthand, have access to that data, and then for us to help to translate that and also activate it together and collect the data, not just for collecting it. Of course, the experience is very important, but also in terms of using it toward a school project or bringing it to a river planning meeting and saying, what's going on with this? Here's what I'm seeing in my backyard. And I think that's really essential and should not be overlooked. So I think there could be even more community engagement as part of this, even more than engagement, maybe there's another word, co-powerment or empowerment to...
Collaboration, maybe.
Yes, for instance, sometimes I go to meetings and there's 5 minutes at the end of a 3-hour meeting for community input, and I'm not sure that's really enough in terms of a really intensive community, in terms of people really being able to express how they feel about it, because what ends up happening is, oh, well, we've run out of time, so next time tell us more. I think that could be put front and center.
We won't run out of time today. I promise, Mark, we'll get to that question. Not to...
Just 5 minutes.
Yeah, not just 5 minutes at the end. Yeah, Sophie.
So I want to talk a little bit about community participation in science. So 20 years ago, 1997, was the development of the very first urban long-term ecological research projects that the National Science Foundation launched. They launched one in Phoenix and one in Baltimore, and boy was that controversial at the time. Those have now generated a huge number of papers and a deep body of research about urban ecology. Concurrent with that original launching of those projects, in the same year was the launch of the very first BioBlitz. And I don't know does everyone know what a BioBlitz is? Raise your hand if you know. So a BioBlitz is a short-term field reconnaissance where people go out in the field. It's typically scientists together with community members and try and record as many species as possible in a particular place to get an idea of what's there, to engage the public in an active science engagement, and to basically build an awareness and an understanding of the natural world. Citizen science, like BioBlitzes, has grown by leaps and bounds over the past 20 years. And I think that it's no mistake that this recognition of urban ecology by authorities like National Science Foundation is occurring alongside with the growth of citizen science, because in urban areas we have so much private property, and much of the nature is found in people's backyards. So in order to understand what organisms are here, we have to have people, everyday citizens, everyday individuals, not necessarily citizens of the United States, all of us citizens of the world, engaged in collecting this information, understanding it, sharing it with one another, and now we have these incredible online resources with millions of data points collected by individuals who don't have any official science training, but who just have an interest in the natural world, and that the power of those data is huge. It's much, much more powerful than if just a couple of scientists go around and only go to public lands and just look at what they can find. And so that type of access is actually the community giving science access to the information, which is a totally different way of thinking about access, and it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up a couple of things. I think for us to really be able to look at policy and who's involved with the policy making, we definitely have to be able to include community in ways that we haven't done in the past. And when I say we, it's the conservation movement. And one of the things that we have learned and have been working on at Debs Park is something that you brought up, this idea of citizen science. It was created to say that you don't have to have a science background to be involved in science, and it was an amazing way to include people in some of the projects that were going on. What we've learned is that it's still a very exclusive term, because if I'm not a citizen, or if my family has immigrated into this country, and I hear something like citizen science, I'm like, okay. Or if I'm leading a tour and, you know, little Paloma or little Bija go and they're part of this tour, and then they say, hey, Daddy, let's go back, and they want to come and visit the park on the weekend, and then the Theo comes along and is just like, you know, I don't know about my immigration status, just by language that we're using, it can turn a lot of folks away. So what we're now looking at is language and how we're able to communicate what we're trying to share. Because if we don't see ourselves a part of this movement or a part of science, it's going to be very hard to get the policy in place to protect the areas that we want. You know, the folks that are just like, I look at the monuments, Yosemite, Joshua Tree, all these places, the folks that are going to protect these places are not the folks that are living around the places themselves. They're folks that are in cities. And for us to be able to make that connection, a lot of them are not going to, sadly, are not going to be able to get to go see these beautiful places. It's just, we have to do a better job at getting access on that level. But we can get them to come out to the LA River. We can get them to come out to Elysian Park or some of the local areas. And Natural History Museum is doing a wonderful job at having BioBlitz in all these different areas and in different languages. And what I see is us having to really meet the community at where they are, not where we want them to be. And that is our task. It's not the burden of the community. Even when we have discussions like this, and you know, how are we going to include the community to be a part of this? I'm not saying that you guys aren't the community, but it's. I always look around and we always say, who's not here? Who's missing? Is it a time thing? Is it you know, what are the issues? What are the barriers? What can we do to remove some of those barriers? So I think a real big piece is for the community to be able to see themselves in this movement, and for everyone in the movement to acknowledge that open space and that being able to connect comes in many different shapes and forms.
So I think our panel is being a little shy. If you want to get involved, join FoLAR, Friends of the Los Angeles River. If you want to get involved, join Audubon Society. If you want to get involved, join the Nature Conservancy. If you want to get involved, join the LA Waterkeeper. Get involved with the LA County Natural History Museum. Like, there's so much going on right now to get involved in, sink your teeth into, and from a policy point of view, who here in a city, I just want to check, in a city of nearly 4 million people, who here has emailed me on a policy issue? Get involved with your lawmakers, your policymakers, because we listen, and especially environment is kind of a really tight community, and I love to hear from people who have great ideas on new policies that we need to push forward, on how to protect the Sepulveda Basin, on how to protect our bird population and the waterways. The Los Angeles is broken down into 98, the number changes every once in a while, 98 neighborhood councils. So you can get involved in your neighborhood council, and that gives your neighborhood kind of a bigger voice to get policy changed. And we really need people who are environmentally inclined on those bodies. And toward that end, we helped start a neighborhood council sustainability alliance to really push environmental policy and aid in spreading it, you know, all across the city, because we really want all Angelinos. What Marcos is getting at is we really want every neighborhood involved. You don't think of biodiversity in the, you know, the deep inner city where everything's concrete, but there's actually really remarkable biodiversity there that we don't even know about because people haven't really cataloged it. And So every way you can get involved is going to help us somehow. And I encourage you to do that. And go down to City Hall, get involved with your state legislators. They're up there in Sacramento hiding away, hoping you don't know what they're doing. Get involved. Get up in their business. Show up at their town meetings. Because the thing that happens is when they know you're paying attention, they'll do good stuff.
That's a very, very, very good point. I think it's, I want to come back to this idea of, I'm glad we're discussing it quite a bit in depth early on, the notion of how to community access to ecology, to that open space, and the importance of it comes in many forms in terms of being able to advocate, in terms of access to sort of education and literacy, as well as to the physical space. And I'm hoping we can jump a little bit into the issue of, what is that urban ecology that we keep trying to struggle in a lot of ways to define? Because I think that it's really, I think we're talking about an opportunity for the community to get involved and a necessity in an urban setting to use the community as a resource. But I'm hoping those of you who have had the opportunity to study our urban ecology or to see where some of the data gaps are missing can share a little bit about, what is the status of what we know right now about the county's biodiversity. We are saying it's incredibly important. I think intrinsically we understand that, but what's our knowledge right now of that system? Is it thriving? Obviously it's heavily impacted? So I'm hoping you can share a little bit about that. I think Sophie and Melissa, it'd be great to hear from you. Whoever.
Well, historically, the places that have been studied most intensely are places that are natural areas that are within the larger greater Los Angeles area. So places like the Santa Monica Mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains, some of the coast. Those are places that probably have the deepest, longest-term engagement of scientists collecting information in an ecological science way. But that, of course, is changing over time, and we're collecting more and more information about the built parts of the environment. Places where, in the past, you might not have wanted to admit that they were habitat. We have a better recognition now because of this dawning of the age of urban ecology, a better recognition of the fact that these places are habitat for a variety of species, many of which are species that we would prioritize for conservation if we found them in wildlands. So things like Least-Bell's vireo, which is often cited, an endangered species of bird that's found in rivers in southwestern United States, and it is found in wild areas. It's at very low numbers. We're trying to recover it at this point in time, but it has been found along the Los Angeles River as well. So that's just one example. There are many examples of species that are found within the built urban environment that if you found them elsewhere, you would say, hey, we should be prioritizing this for conservation and taking action to protect it, protecting lands, doing restoration, changing policies and whatnot. There's no reason we shouldn't be doing those same things locally in the urban environment. That being said, there's still some major data gaps for understanding urban ecology and for understanding how organisms live here and how they're adapting to the urban environment. Because the wildlife that lives in cities isn't necessarily the same as the wildlife that lives outside of cities. And this is a very new idea, this beginning of an understanding of how species are actually adapting to live in urban areas. Sometimes they change their birdsong, sometimes they change their behavior, sometimes they are selected over time for certain traits, for certain behaviors, because those traits or behaviors help them survive in an urban area. So these organisms that live here can be really different than the ones that are they're the same species living in wildlands. That's pretty interesting. If we want to have a diverse suite of organisms in the city, we have to think about what does it take to survive as an organism in this city. What are the traits that that allow for success. And I don't think we should be shying away from that. I think we should be investigating it really deeply. So we need more people studying urban ecology to be able to uncover that. It's not just about where the organisms are, it's how it's their behavioral ecology, how they're interacting with one another, their predator-prey relationships, their competition, how they're acquiring resources. All that stuff is important. And if nothing else, we have P22 to tell us that at least one mountain lion is doing something very different in order to be surviving in such a small territory for such a long period of time. And so that's interesting. We need to look at those examples and see if we can find more, see if we can find out as much as we can about those things.
I think as an organization, we've been trying to shift from thinking about water in terms of pollution to thinking about it in terms of what the Nature Conservancy says about hydrology driving biology. And actually, in our river assessment fieldwork team with our volunteers, we asked them, what are you interested in doing more with us? Because at the beginning, we were doing a lot of water quality monitoring, and that was of interest. But some of them said, we really want to understand what's going on with these birds, or what's going on with these insects that we're seeing. How do they relate to each other? So we're moving toward a more holistic view of river health in sort of monitoring we're doing, such as by using the iNaturalist app, which could potentially benefit maybe the work you were talking about, doing macroinvertebrate or insect studies in different sections of the river to see, are there any insects in our fully concretized sections, for example? What does that look like compared to the section we see here? How could we think about different types of river health? Because I think right now when we think about health, there are a lot of amazing studies being done, especially about the Glendale Narrows. But when we think about another section where we're working, for instance, in Maywood, which is fully concretized, it's maybe a bit of a different discussion in terms of the biology that exists there. And I think when I go with volunteers, I often hear surprise that, first of all, there are so many bird species there. You've even seen vultures. We've seen many different wading birds. You never know what you're going to see. We've seen many snakes and turtles, many that seem to have escaped surrounding home. So it's definitely a different type of ecology than you might expect. Not a native turtle necessarily, but yes. So I think there are all these stories that are outside of the norm. I totally agree with you. And with our volunteers, we don't want to just say, oh, that was interesting, we saw this snake, but we want to start documenting it so that we can see, will we see the snake again? What does this mean as it relates to the health of the waterway in general? Are we seeing it in many sections of the waterway? Are we seeing it throughout the watershed? What's the connectivity looking like? So I think there are a lot of interesting questions, and I would say we're working on answering them, and it makes this such an exciting time as we think about biodiversity in our watersheds.
I think one thing we forgot to mention, Los Angeles lies within the California Floristic Province, which is one of 35 biodiversity hotspots in the world, which means that we've got a really wide array of plants and animals, but also that they're endangered. And so that's sort of the context that goes over this whole thing. We have a responsibility to really protect our amazing biodiversity. So some of the things that we've found in terms of documentation, we partnered with the Natural History Museum last summer or 2 summers ago. I've been having children, so I'm kind of a blur. Sometime in the recent past, we partnered with the Nature Conservancy and did a what's it called, a bioscan trap on the roof of City Hall South, and we found micro wasps, which they were completely not expecting to find. And inside City Hall there were rats and snakes and slime, but outside City Hall, they also found some new. One of the scientists at the Natural History Museum found some new types of flies that nobody had ever found before. So there are things here that nobody even knows about, and how long have human beings been here? and been documenting, but clearly we haven't been doing a good enough job. Also, there's one really exciting project that I just learned about yesterday, and it's not really mine to announce, but it's and I'm sort of not going to, but I will a little bit. But it's sort of a map of the connectivity of the whole city, and looking at the wildlife connectivity, but then what can we do as a city to build, swaths of native plants so that we're building habitat actively down like an entire boulevard, and studying what insects and animals and birds live in an area, so we build the right habitat for them in that area. So kind of marrying science together with city planning and creating the beautiful city of the world, of the future that we really want.
It's hard to follow up on I think all those incredibly relevant points. I think actually, Andy, I'm glad you brought that up. Recently, I had the privilege really to go to attend a national conference called River Rally, and this is back in not this past year, but the previous years, in Mobile, Alabama. They make you say Mobile. You can't say it any other way. It has to be Mobile, Alabama, so if you're ever there, I told you first. About the level of biodiversity that sort of exists across the nation. And it was really interesting to hear Alabama speak so positively and passionately and proudly about the interesting biodiversity that they have there that was second only to California. And it was really strange to go across the country in a place that had far more lush vegetation, abundance of water, but here they were talking about the prevalence of species, the species numbers that existed in California. I think, particularly for myself, having grown up here in Los Angeles, I think it's something that's very easy to take for granted if you've never had the opportunity to learn about it, to witness it, to see it for yourself, to engage with it. And so I think it's, I think not only do we have a responsibility here locally, but there is this responsibility we have, I think, nationally and even worldwide, in terms of thinking about what that resource actually represents for us. It's okay, that's part of the show. Cue the dogs, yeah. So I think I want to tie this a little bit back into, and I think we'll definitely have a lot more questions in regard to that topic, but tying it back into the river, and sort of we reference these, the benefits, these opportunities that exist. We have, several planning efforts, some ongoing, some that are coming up pretty soon. The city's LA River Revitalization Master Plan, I think biodiversity motion that we'd love to talk about later on, and the Arbor study, the alternative 20 project that's actually looking at changing the physical context of the river for the first time since we put concrete in it, back in the 30s and 40s. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, how do we deliver on that promise? How do we make sure that that this river delivers on the promise and benefits that ecosystem, that ecology that we want it to, while providing those benefits to the communities as well? I'm hoping you can share a little bit more about that. Whoever wants to jump in here.
I think that one of the things that we really have to look at when we're attempting to change how the river is being able to also influence behavior change, because a lot of I guess what relies on being able to maintain the biodiversity and even increase that will have to be on our shoulders. I mean, everything really comes down to how we're going to be able to interact with our environment. And I think when we look at the river and being able to connect people to the river and the biodiversity, that's where we have to really look at what are some of the programs or methods that we're using to get the word out in a way that we can really see that connection. Because we could talk about it here and we can point to birds and we can talk about how it all ties into something much larger like the Pacific Flyway or the many different flyways throughout the country, and how it doesn't stop just at this country. But if we're not really owning that as individuals, then it's going to be really hard to I guess, really push something that costs a lot of money and that brings in a lot of resources to really have that impact with some of these or that some of the studies are saying. I don't know if anyone else wants that.
And if I can, maybe I can elaborate on the question a little bit as well. I think, so definitely want to continue to hear your thoughts. And I think the other thought that lingers in the back of my mind is, what is at stake? If this project, if it, obviously it has a huge, as you mentioned, sort of shock value when you think about the project, which is up to $1.6 billion now. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of resources that we're investing in a place. But I think it's important to weigh that against what is at stake with this project moving forward. So I'm hoping you can share some of that.
Yeah, I think that we should take that price tag and put it into context with some of the other major projects that get done, and that helps us to think about, how expensive is it really. But I wanted to say a little bit about what the Nature Conservancy is doing to be a part of this habitat enhancement and potential for water capture along the Los Angeles River. So over the past couple of years, we worked to generate a study along the 2.5-mile stretch of the river that runs between Los Feliz Boulevard and basically right about here. It's a soft bottom portion of the river. It has vegetation along the entire stretch, and we did an in-depth study of the plants and animals and mapped the vegetation and looked at all the occurrence data, and then did a full suite of field studies for everything from insects, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, birds, you name it. Tried to get a really in-depth look at what is currently here. We also did a historical ecology study to ask the question, based on records, old maps, journals, any old information that we could get, what was the river like at the time of European settlement? What did it look like then? What organisms were here at that point in time? We also did an in-depth study of the hydrology of the river. And I have a one-page handout on the table at the front that's about some of the outcomes of the study. But the thing that we really, one of the outcomes and one of the things that came to the front in completing this study was that we need to have a shared vision of what we would like the flow in the Los Angeles River to be like in the future, because it's very managed. The flow in the river is being released primarily from wastewater treatment facilities at this point in time. It's 10 times what it was in the past during the dry season, and it flows year-round. And that's very different from the historical condition. It's not just a difference in there's some concrete on the sides and the river's been channelized. There's actually a difference in the amount and the timing of water. So the hydrology is hugely altered. It's also very controlled by humans. So we need to think about what do we want that to look like in the future? And when we're thinking about habitat enhancement, I use that term instead of saying restoration, because someone always raises their hand and say, you can't really return it to what it was in the past. Can you? Well, there are lots of people living in the floodplain of the Los Angeles River, so no. But we can think about how to enhance this habitat. But we need to have a conversation, a frank conversation about what we would like the flow of the river to be seasonally, and whether or not what conditions does that provide? What plants will that support? Is that a suite of plants that was there historically? Is it a mixture of natives and non-natives? Is it plants that require wet conditions year-round? We need to have this conversation, because until we have a group vision and understanding of what we'd like the flow in the river to be, we can't have a good plan for planting plants and enhancing this ecology of the river, because the plants depend on that hydrology. They depend on when that water is flowing. So something to think about. And one of the major outcomes of our study was a big question, which is, I think, always happens when scientists are involved. So it always comes to, okay, this is what we don't know, and this is the conversation we need to have. And it's actually not a science question, it's a policy question, and so everyone has to be involved in thinking about the answer.
But I agree with you in terms of working toward a shared vision, and I think right now what I see is a lot of decision-making happening, but in terms of fragmented parts of the river, let's do something over here without necessarily considering the upstream or downstream connection. And something I would really like to see is more watershed level planning, because right now there's a great deal of emphasis on beautification, I think, and working within the status quo. Some areas are further along than others, but in other sections of the river I often hear about aesthetic changes rather than having conversations really about how could this both benefit water quality and be a resource for the community. I mean, how could we bring together the environment and the community rather than viewing those two pieces of the conversation as two separate pieces? So I would really like to see more of that and more conversations that are driven by a shared vision around flow, for example, throughout the entire watershed, and bringing that data to light, in fact, across the region.
So I want to give the kind of 30,000 feet of what's at stake. We're in the midst of the 6th extinction event worldwide. And Los Angeles, according to the Guardian newspaper, is the #1 branded city in the world, which means that what we do here matters to everybody else. And people pay attention to what we do here. When we ban plastic bags, for instance, within 2 hours I got phone calls from South Korea and New Zealand asking how we did it. And I didn't even know they were awake at that hour. And, so what happens in Los Angeles doesn't stay in Los Angeles. It echoes. And we're facing this huge extinction event that we're causing. If Los Angeles, the place that's known for its concrete and freeways, can pull this off and bring back the river and enhance our biodiversity and protect our biodiversity, then the whole world will see that it can be done. And they'll know about it. And they'll realize that they can do it where they live. So we have to, because it's our responsibility, and it's a nice planet.
Yeah, and I really like this idea of a shared vision, and I know it doesn't always work out that way, or just even with the planning, and there's also this idea of loving something to death. One thing I look at is as you were talking about the flow of water, and how we look at the fragmented pieces, and when you get down to the lower LA River, which we consider an important bird area, it has gotten to a place, and this is current, where it has gotten to a level where any more water would threaten that. Any less water would threaten it. So right now it's at a level where I know Audubon is definitely looking at that because we want to look at our birds, and a lot of the projects that are happening are calling for, hey, well, why don't we use some of the water here? Why don't we use some of the water there? Or everyone should stop using as much water. What happens when people start doing that? When we start conserving more water and less water is being put in, and then there's less water in the being treated because we're conserving, we're doing all these things that we really want people to do, and then it has these effects that we're not really thinking about, or folks maybe not be talking about. So that was just something that I thought of as you guys were sharing.
So it's about that time that I'd like to open it up to the audience, sort of for any questions, any input, feedback. You obviously have a great deal of expertise here. Is there anything else you want to share just before we start opening it up? I know I have my own questions, but I will save them for last because they're probably the least important ones. So,
Mark's been waiting patiently.
Mark has been waiting patiently. I did promise you the first question. So, unless anybody on the panel would like to share anything else? Okay, Mark, if you're more than welcome to come up to take the microphone, but you set that precedent for everybody else.
I don't think I'll need one.
Okay.
Yeah, I've forgotten all my questions, so but I'll try to start fresh. I think a lot of these questions that I have involve everybody up there. So let me just start by saying I attended a meeting last night with the Warner Center Woodland Hills Neighborhood Council. They had a special presentation on city planning with focus on the Warner Center Woodland Hills area.
Can everybody hear his question? Okay, so I might have to give you the mic.
Okay, just to repeat briefly, I attended a meeting last night with the Warner Center Woodland Hills Neighborhood Council. It's probably Woodland Hills Warner Center Neighborhood Council, but that's beside the point. And the meeting was primarily to hear a presentation from the LA City Planning Department regarding the Woodland Hills Warner Center area and the issues of how the City Planning Department is changing their procedures and how that might affect our area. Nevertheless, what I wanted to get to was, and this is particularly germane for Andy, is that out of that meeting, one of the things that really caught my attention was that the presenter mentioned that there's no way for the City Planning Department to include planning for parks in any of the planning areas. And yet they can plan for zoning of all sorts of other things, commercial, residential, industrial, and so forth. But no planning for parks. The explanation being that the land where the parks might be planned is all privately owned, and they can't impose that planning requirement on private property. So that's one of the things that came out of it. The other thing is that the city has a lot of great plans for planning, and these really are beautiful, logical planning ideas. I have no problem with that. The trouble is when it comes down to the actual implementation of these things, what we're left with is great plans that have the potential for being modified not too far down the line by individuals and corporations and other entities that want variances in the zoning rules and plans. And what we've seen over and over again is that leading to high density development, higher density development in many of these areas. So we're left with no parks, with higher density developments. The planning process itself is oriented towards higher density developments. So let's try to make this relevant to biodiversity and urban ecology in some way. Basically, we're losing it. In spite of all the good intentions, we're losing it at the present time. There have been some positive developments, but there's a lot of things that are overlooked. So I'll have you respond to that, but I want to involve some of the others here too, and particularly the Nature Conservancy, since I'm a member of the Nature Conservancy. We have golden opportunities in the city of Los Angeles for Nature Conservancy involvement besides the Los Angeles River, but also including areas of Los Angeles that are part of the Los Angeles River watershed. And I'm speaking specifically of Chatsworth Nature Preserve in the northwest San Fernando Valley, also known as Chatsworth Reservoir. Also, we have golden opportunities at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, which includes some of the headwaters of Los Angeles River. So some of the planning that's going on there with respect to the field lab is deadly in terms of biodiversity, because what's coming down the pipe is the elimination of surface water impoundments. Where probably the last remaining habitats for western spade-foot toads in the Los Angeles area reside, and there are many other species that depend on those water bodies. Other things to involve Melissa a little bit here is the LA waterkeepers. I don't know what to say about this really, but there are people that are on your board who let us down severely when we were trying to save Sepulveda Basin from the massive project plan there called Angel Fest. So I won't mention any names. I'll let you folks deal with this the way you can, but those are just some of the issues. So Andy, with all due respect, involving the city agencies is really a problem here, because we're getting mixed messages from the city. We're seeing more and more allowances for development all over the city, with, at best, very little attention given to the needs of wildlife, biodiversity, ecology, etc., except as an afterthought, and usually when people like myself raise the issue in their 2-minute talks at these neighborhood council meetings. So I think I can stop there.
I'll let you go.
So the danger you face when you walk into a public setting, and you recognize the people who are dangerous to have in the audience, and I saw Mark immediately and was like, okay. That is a compliment, because he's a great advocate, and really, honestly, and I appreciate your efforts all the time, and it never gets old. So I don't even know how to answer this. The city, there's like 11 different things to answer in that. The city is currently undergoing something that's called Recode 2050, which is it's looking deeply at its entire city planning code, and looking, what do we want to be in 2050? So this is a really important thing for people to get their voices into at City Hall. Find out about the commission. I'm not that up to date on it, but it's something really important to get involved with, and make your voices heard. Number 2 is, if you go to these neighborhood council meetings and have your voice heard, even if it's 2 minutes, you can say a lot in 2 minutes. I banned plastic bags in the whole city in 2 minutes. So you can do it.
I was just, actually, I'm just suggesting to Andy here, I think part of the reason I brought him on, I didn't know that you were the only dedicated person looking at environmental issues in the whole city council. That makes me, makes you doubly special. Really? I mean, I thought it was just the family concerns that were tying you up, but so I think it's important for you to share in the context of that question, what the relevance of the biodiversity motion that you recently helped pass with Councilmember Perez's motion, like how could that help? What could that do to address some of that issue of putting actually into policy the essentially the perspective that these different departments now all have to, in a really comprehensive and collaborative way, really start to look at the benefits of these open space, of that ecology that we talk about. So I don't know if you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So are there any developers in the audience? City planners? As we were conceiving the biodiversity motion and the messaging to get it through the council, we said, do not talk about ways that we can stop development. Don't tell any of the staffers that, don't tell any of the council members, don't do it. We got it approved unanimously, no problem. So now we can use it and really focus in on, here is habitat for this, endangered bird. Here is habitat, and start really planning. And it's going to take a big effort, because once again, the folks who are helping me are these folks. And we've got no biologist, no city biologist, if that can be believed. And we're trying to fund one and get one on the staff. We have 0. We have one of me there's a couple people sort of like me who are interested in these issues, but they don't have the latitude that I have to actually really focus on them, which is sad, because I can't stay late like I used to. What else? So get involved, yes.
So I remember in the 80s there were Mello-Roos laws, I think they were called, or Mello-Roos financing or something, and it had to do with when a development was being made that a certain amount had to be set aside for green spaces and that sort of thing. Is that talked about at all? And I know it requires the...
I'll summarize. Back in the 80s, before my time here, there was a Mello-Roos policy that if you're developing, you have to have a certain amount of green space nearby, which I think is logical and smart. I haven't heard anything about that, and as Mark was speaking, I was thinking, why isn't that in place? If you want to build a unit for 100 people or 1,000 people, then there should be a percentage of green space that should be, I mean, that seems logical.
It's a 2/3 vote. That's the problem.
And my understanding is there's also some, because this is, sorry, so the planning process that you were referencing, there's Recode, which is actually just restructuring zoning ordinances, which is a little bit separately than the actual update to the city plan, which is actually going through LA 2040, which is also separate from the community plans, if you can figure out how that all sort of works together. It was brought up in the open space element, where we're trying to figure out in the city's general plan, how do you preserve open space? There was a distinction between, and for the developments, I think this is what you're referencing, there is an allotment that developments have to provide in terms of their developments, their projects, but the calculation is different whether it's private space versus open space. My understanding that a development can have space, but private space can be a balcony or a rooftop garden, which is very different, I think, than the types of spaces. Not to say it's not insignificant, it's not potentially important to have, but very different from sort of publicly accessible space and green space that's meant as habitat. Because I think historically we've conflated those two terms. Park space isn't the same thing as open space, and we've typically treated them sort of separately and differently. Sorry, but I don't know if anybody else had a... so I think Dave, really quickly over here.
I'll speak up. First off, I'm already in it. You guys have already got me really, really excited. The conservation chair of the San Fernando Valley Audubon, and of course we represent the headwaters of that is the Coleman Sewage Treatment Plant. But I just want to throw into the mix, living with the wildlife that we already have is probably a discussion as well. I happen to live in Epicenter, and once in a while there's a bear in our neighborhood, and coyotes and whatever. And just, I think, put that into the mix as well. Maybe that's an early part of the implementation phase, if you will, is just getting folks to live with the wildlife that we already have and protect their growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dave was, or I guess he made a comment on us being able to live with the wildlife that already exists in the city. And one thing that we are doing at Debs Park that we have a lot of are coyotes. Coyotes are coming out, and it just so happens that we are seeing a really high number of folks that are going to Debs Park that are walking dogs. And they just happen to get in the habit of walking their dogs off leash. So one thing that we're doing is we're working with the city and the city rangers, and at one point we had an area that was just closed to anyone walking dogs. Now, as we look at moving forward, we want to be able to have folks in the park and not treat them any differently, but do it in a way where we can all coexist, because Debs Park is home to these coyotes, and there are a lot of, I guess, myths about coyotes, what they're eating, and they're going to get your cat, and they're going to get your dog. So what we're doing is we're sponsoring a coyote scat program where folks are collecting coyote scat from around the city, and they're able to come to Debs Park and actually go through it. And we're learning that, you know what, the coyotes aren't eating a lot of cats or a lot of dogs. Occasionally you get something in there, but they're mainly eating our trash. So it is really important for us to be able to do this science, make it available for community to participate, and then we need to share what we find. And that is one of the hardest, I guess, pieces of the puzzle, is being able to get this information to everyone, because we put up a sign, that sign comes down, we do an email blast, not everyone's on our email list, and then when we think we've thought of everything, we learn that we just missed a whole audience, different audience. So that's one thing that we're looking at.
I don't have a lot to add to that. That was a great answer. I'm aware of both of those opportunities. Yeah. Well, so like Andy highlighted, there are priorities that have to be addressed, and you don't necessarily get to choose what those are when you're at a certain level in an organization. So that's just to be very frank with you, that's the reality of it.
So another question then. Can everybody hear me? How can I, as an individual, prompt the Nature Conservancy?
Well, okay, so another way to think about this is there's a lot of opportunity amongst the land trust community. There are many, many, many land trusts out there, and they focus in different areas on different types of lands, smaller parcels in an urban context versus larger areas outside of cities. And I would encourage you to look to a local land trust, because I think you will have much more success with that.
In joining FoLAR and Audubon and Nature Conservancy and LA Waterkeeper, I encourage you to rise up and take over, because if they're not going the direction you want them, make them. Just like with your politicians. Hey, Sophie can't say that, but I can. In regards to living with urban wildlife, if you are an apex predator, this is the path to success, and I want to lay it out for you. If you are an apex predator living in Los Angeles, the way to success is to eat a koala bear at the zoo. The minute P22 did that, allegedly, suddenly one of the council members was like, we have to get rid of that mountain lion, and every person in the city jumped down his throat and said, don't you touch our mountain lion. So that says a lot, that we're willing to have an apex predator and protect him, and he literally could walk over, where we are right now and eat us. But he doesn't want to eat us. He wants to eat coyotes and raccoons, who he sometimes mistakes with koala bears for. Anyway, it's an exciting time to be here.
So we'll go quickly to the back, and then the gentleman here. Steve, I don't know if you want to stand up. Or
Probably you can hear me.
Yeah.
Got a big voice. So I like the 30,000-foot look. I also think this conversation about living with habitat is really interesting. And, this is a policy thing. And, a couple things we should be aware of. Like in the Rio area, there is the Rio plan. Already the city's gone through a lot of work to articulate a plant matrix that's supposed to exist within 2 miles of the river. I think it's 2 miles or a mile, something like that. The issue is, it's, I hate to use the word enforced, but it's not enforced. It's not really integrated into the planning process. Anybody that goes to build in the area will find there's kind of a checkoff, but it's not really observed. And so I think we still are at a stage in this whole thing where I do think we're at a very personal relationship to it. So I'm just going to play something here. Those are a kind of tree frog that I've been recording here in this area for 10 years, and I could go on. I have recordings recording upon recording of that. And yet, this year they're not here. And this is the first year in 10 years they're not here. And I don't want to single focus an issue, but I think this is actually really important to mention, is that we are still in a debate about a policy level in terms of government entities and this cooperation towards restoration, where, you know, the kind of archetypical photo of Lewis McAdams, stop with the bulldozers, we're still at a level where there's a real serious debate on a policy level about how do we restore. So the Arundo cleaning and non-native cleaning that happened in the river this winter, scheduled, planned, publicly noticed, agreed to end by March, did not end by March. Yeah, probably good reason because of the rains, but that clearing includes the use of Roundup. Roundup is absolutely devastating to amphibian populations. No question about it. Absolutely no scientific question. There may be variations by temperature, there may be variations by co-products in with the mix, all kinds of things, but the bottom line is these tree frogs, either Baja California tree frogs or some form of Pacific tree frog that have been here for 10 years and were breeding in a pond right there last year, are not. And I think that I don't want to single focus on the Armored Corps. There's been such an improvement in that relationship, but we're still at a stage where the issue is, hey, we have a real plan as a plant matrix, but it's not actually happening. We have an intention to be involved in whatever level of restoration. What's the water flow? What's the control? Is it restoration? Is it a managed habitat? Whatever it is it a managed habitat for humans? All those things. Nonetheless, on really nitty-gritty levels, you know, as somebody who just got his feet out of the river not 1 hour ago, from the water level, not the 30,000 square foot, 30,000 foot level, we're still missing really, and this level of activism, I think, I totally agree with you, we must stand up for the steps necessary. And for me, honestly, I could cry about the frogs right now. I'm really, really, really very sad about that. Will they come back? Probably, but I'm very sad about it. And we're in the frog spot, you know, so the ironies abound. I think that we have to really articulate as a community what we really need and demand in terms of the small steps along the way. And I think, so there's a big planning process, but for me, this is a huge loss, and I didn't know where to go with it. You know, I'm a very active political person, extremely, and can reach council members, et cetera, and yet, I really couldn't move fast enough to deal with this issue this year, and it bums me out, like, you know, terribly. So we have to keep, you know, one inspiration I take from Lewis is it was always coming back to this relationship, and I think this is very much a relationship question among ourselves to the river, to the environment, and I think we have to validate that that's an important motivator, and we have to keep working with it.
So this is a perfect example of how you can get involved. We're sitting at the frog spot hearing about frog death and frogs vanishing, and if you go to the city council, the city clerk's page where we've got all the files, all the motions that are introduced, if you go there and you search, you can find that Councilmember Bonin and my boss introduced a motion to stop Roundup from being used in City Park clearings, and you know, so we made a little victory there. So this group here could collectively, and somebody has paper, write a petition, send it to Councilmember Bonin, and say Roundup was used in the river, the frogs are gone, can we take this to the next step? And I guarantee you, Councilmember Bonin, who I know, will say, good idea, and do something about it. Like, it's that easy, and there's not anybody that's going to argue with you except for the implementers who are out there trying to get rid of the invasives. But we can make a policy.
Yeah, so I think that's great that Eddie brought that up.
And FoLAR should lead the effort.
We're trying. We're working on it. And on that very issue, and I think the like with everything else, I think acknowledging what resources, what capacity, what we can leverage. In terms of that question, particularly around the herbicides and Roundup, you remember this question came up if people aren't familiar, so the Army Corps introduced sort of vegetation maintenance program as an emergency measure against these really incredible storms that we did have this past season. Of course, there were some other measures that were implemented. People who have been in this area are probably familiar with the HESCO barrier that are preventing access in some places. But the question about, how does a community's voice, how is that leveraged against what their mandates are? And I think it's important here to point out that the Army Corps of Engineers is a federal entity, right? And we're talking about, at our own city level, Andy's the only person that we have who's specifically out there talking about the environment on the city council level. You can only imagine how much more difficult or how much of a greater disconnect there is from that on-the-ground experience to our federal partners, to whom we don't have as much opportunity to leverage information and sometimes even science against. And so I think it's an individual tragedy that points to a systematic problem of river governance, right? We don't have a unified vision, a unified authority for how we manage the space and how we balance both the ecological benefits, the recreational benefits, the water quality benefits, with the flood control issues, because that historically has driven everything. And so I think it's great that there's a clear opportunity. Andy's pointing out an opportunity that exists, and absolutely our organizations are answerable to the public. That's exactly why we exist, to enable that community voice, that scientific voice, to be measured against sort of the existing status quo. So we are, I can tell you if FoLAR, I have something that I'm working on that Marissa back there has empowered me to do. She's hiding behind the snacks, so somebody go say hi to her later on. But we're working on things, but we have to do it smartly. We have to do it strategically, and we'll be reaching out to our partners, and be rest assured we'll be reaching out to you as well to try to address this issue, because it's not something that we want to get into carelessly. We want to get in it and make sure that the outcome that we want actually happens. So I don't know if
I was also thinking of that in terms of a violation of the Clean Water Act as well, and another angle that we could look at it. I think it's very frustrating to see often great policy, but not great enforcement or implementation of it. And this seems like, I think it's also, there's a lot of greenwashing that I think occurs, where we say, yes, of course, we're making great changes, we're protecting the environment, but then, like you're saying, the nitty-gritty reality of it doesn't necessarily match up, and we need community members like yourself and business owners and people who are living here and experiencing it firsthand to have a voice in that. And I wish that as organizations together we could amplify that, because I know individually we may have very limited resources as organizations, but if somehow we could have a joint messaging system to amplify voices like this, that would be really helpful, I think. Also, to see if other people are seeing the same thing. I'd love to put this out there, and then
I think the question should be asked on a scientific level, because I'm just, an amateur biologist, mapping little breeding ponds and recording them. So I think it's a bigger question, of course, but I'm asking it among the people that are here to look at it.
Because it would be interesting.
Amphibians are such indicators of river health.
Yes. It would be interesting to compare that to iNaturalist as well, where we're seeing recordings of amphibians and whether there's a change from last year, and using this story as an example.
Did you talk to Greg Pauley at the Natural History Museum yet?
I haven't since we spoke the other day, but I did originally send him recordings last year, and I'm going to follow up.
Yeah, he's a great resource, and I'm sure he'd be interested to know about this. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Audrey, and I'm an undergraduate student, and I got interested in the LA River while doing essay for this urban planning history class. And my question sort of has two parts. So the first part is that, like, we talked a lot about water quality, but I was wondering about air quality and if your organizations, like, have investigated into what impacts on, like, the riverfront air quality might be if this plan can get implemented. Because I am a runner and I've tried to, like, get to the LA River, like, from where I live in Koreatown, and it's really hard to get around, like, the highways that are like sort of choking the LA River right now, and there's not a lot of pedestrian paths at all that, like, connect everything. So that was my first question. But I also think that whenever, like, environmental things, like, come into, like, policy, like, there's, like, sort of a difference between, like, concerns that directly affect human health and concerns that are sort of more geared towards, like, biodiversity and, like, general natural health. And it's, like, easy to say, like, oh, like, if the air quality is bad, then it affects residents' health, so, like, we need to do something about it. But, like, what the gentleman said over there, like, if, like, there's one species of frog disappears, like, I'm not a biologist, and, like, my interest in, like, nature conservancy is, like, very, like, amateur. Like, I just started it as I went into college, and my first reaction, like, just, like, 2 years ago would have been, like, so what? Like, who cares? And I must say, like, for my family, like, and, like, the people around me, I don't have a lot of, like, I don't know a lot of people within, like, my Koreatown community that would be up in arms because, like, one species of frog, like, disappears 1 year. And I know that, like, my knowledge is, like, limited in terms of, like, what that might mean for river health. But how would you guys, as nature conservancy agencies, sort of have that kind of public, like, outreach where, like, people who aren't, like, coming to these meetings, people who aren't even thinking about the river, don't even know that the river exists. My little sister doesn't know that the river exists. How would you, like, do that kind of public PR? So those are my two questions.
I think the first part of your question answers the second part, or at least it can, in that there's some really good correlative and actually causal studies that show that that lung health in particular is really closely associated with tree health in cities. And they're studies from Italy. They're also studies from the upper part of the Midwestern United States, and I can look them up for you if you're very interested in that. But I think that in cases where people are not necessarily interested in a particular frog, they might be interested in something else, and that might be recreation or human health or some other co-benefit that nature has. And I think that there are many cases where those connections are well established. It's just a matter of sharing them with the community in a way that is engaging and convincing and authentic.
In terms of the first part, I feel that water quality and air quality are too often divorced in terms of the ways we approach environmental questions in LA when they're so interconnected, like you're saying. And something we're trying to do is partner with different environmental justice organizations that may be more invested in air quality as the first concern, and then look at sources of pollution maybe from a Clean Water Act perspective, and then we would also be trying to solve something that relates to air. So we're trying to relate those. Something I've heard at a lot of lower LA River working group meetings is that there's a concern about why would we be trying to bring people to the river next to the 710? Why would we be opening up recreation opportunities when our children have asthma? And why would we want to invite them there? So I think we can't just think about river access in terms of getting people there, but also about the surrounding context and larger questions of health. Yes, and in terms of the second part of your question, I think something that both Steves here are doing really well, Steve Appleton and Stephen Mejia over here at Carranza, they're doing a really great job of taking people to the river and introducing them, and I think that's the first step in terms of understanding how this relates to us, because I think there's still so many people who say, I I've never been to the river, I don't know what you mean. And some organizations, like the ones here, are doing an amazing job in just making that introduction to begin with.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're starting to see, especially with the conservation environmental movement, is that the face of it is changing. You look at a lot of the politicians that are putting bills in, they're not doing it because of a little bird or a frog. They're doing it because their constituents want clean air and they want clean water. So as conservation organizations, what we're doing is we're reaching out to our communities and our folks and looking at these environmental justice issues and seeing how can we support the person or the community or the people that we ultimately need to support the birds or the frogs. And it brings up a lot of issues that are very controversial at times, because then measures and policies get introduced, and then people aren't really sure which way to go when it comes to doing something for nature or doing something because it's a social issue. So it really gets into what is the vision of the organization. Are we looking at our community as a vote? Are we looking at our community as volunteer hours or a potential donor? Or are we looking at our community as community and embracing all the issues and concerns of these communities? And when we start to look in a way that is really embracing the neighborhood, we start embracing issues like homelessness, substance abuse, domestic violence, all these things that contribute to all these issues then affecting conservation. And we find where they intersect, and then we're able to support these policies that will ultimately will be able to get pushed through to what we want to do is protect the environment. So it's not us changing our mission as Audubon, it's us being able to partner with organizations that are really going after these issues.
Sorry, I had questions over here first.
Thank you. My name is Lane, and I've been involved with the river mostly from the point of view of arts and culture ever since, I guess, 1997. And off and on, I've done research, and I've always been totally fascinated by this part of the river that has been allowed to grow and develop this kind of, in some ways, odd ecology, because this is like constant, warm, nitrogen-laden water all year. And I've always wondered about this ecology and if it's something that we want, and you brought that up when you mentioned controlling dry season flow. And whenever this thing of flow comes up, there's this elephant in the room, which is that we have no control over wet season flow. And at some point, I think I learned that Orange County has a much better system for that than we do. And I was like, Orange County, are you kidding me? That's embarrassing, you know? And so that's half of my question is like, what's going on with that? I mean, once I went to a Army Corps of Engineers meeting over at the LA River School, and I went up and asked them specifically, like, can't you just ask people up in the mountains to start, can't you enable them to have collection tanks? And they was like, well, we don't do that. That's not what we do. We can't deal with that. No, it's impossible. And I was like, why is it impossible? So that's one part of my question, is like, what's happening? Because the gold standard is to control the amount of water that goes into the river during flood events. Isn't that correct? Like, otherwise, how will we be able to control anything or have any vision of what we want the river to be when we get trashy floodwaters every winter and nothing's really happening in a serious way to deal with that problem? It's an enormous problem. So I can understand why people don't really want to talk about it that much. It's going to cost a fortune. One question. The other question is about Frogtown, which is dear to my heart. I don't really live here, but it's so dear to my heart. And at one point in my research, I learned, and I stand to be corrected because I don't know much about this, that one of the reasons that it's called Frogtown is that there was a toad, a species called the western toad, that was migrating from Elysian Park to the river every year by the thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of toads. And when they built the 5 freeway, that was the end of the toad migration. You can imagine what would happen to a toad migrating to the river with the 5. So in certain places, I think in Europe, they have tunnels for the toads to go under the freeway. And I've always wondered, why can't we have toad tunnels? I mean, is that something anywhere on the event horizon? So that's my 2 things.
We can have tow tunnels. We should have tow tunnels. I think that that there's some conversation now, some discussion about connectivity, and it's often framed in thinking about the largest organisms first. And it is no secret that there's bias everywhere, but there's bias in and amongst how we think about conservation, and that we often prioritize the large. Right. We often prioritize the, yeah. then they become sexy. We often prioritize the large organisms first, and the reasoning behind that isn't just that you can sell this big animal and get people to support it. It's in part that if we can build the idea that if we can build an overpass that a mountain lion can use, perhaps a toad could use it too. But the flip side of that is thinking about is there a lower hanging fruit that would potentially be easier to do for connectivity for some of the smaller organisms? And the answer is yes. It just takes the will to do it. It takes people to be interested and bring up the idea and support the idea, and that's what it takes.
Steve and I were at a meeting recently when someone suggested having a strategy of moving by hand all the toads and frogs, and I'm not sure about that. I think it would be great to integrate these ideas into the fabric of our world, and instead of it being something that will require additional maintenance or activity, because that may not happen. In terms of stormwater, I think there's a lot of exciting work that's happening right now, both on a regional level in terms of thinking about stormwater measure to have larger scale projects. But there's also some exciting work happening in terms of activating community members to do something in their outdoor space and thinking on a parcel scale level, because I think there's been an idea of let's have these large scale projects, but they may take a long time. And then there's actually a lot that individual community members can do to make changes if you have an outdoor space or you have some authority over what happens where you live, in terms of creating habitat in your own outdoor space, introducing native plants, but also getting more water into the ground and helping with that process so that, so that it doesn't go through our storm drain systems and out through the river. It doesn't contribute to that flooding. So I think that's something that's long been overlooked, but could actually be, and is an exciting strategy, and it's especially something the River Project and Melanie Winter is working on right now. So exciting work is happening.
With the secret report that I read that I didn't tell you about, if anyone asked, the connectivity map that's being made is going to tell us where there are frogs and where frogs need to go. And if there's a frog over here and then a freeway in the middle and a frog over here, then hopefully we can really plan to get frog, without that video game, what is it, Frogger? if we can really plan in the future, if we're replacing a freeway, if we're replacing a bridge, if we're putting in critical infrastructure, that we can think about this and we can know exactly what creatures are living over here that need to get over there, and what can we do to, you know, the bridge that they want to build for. They say it's for P22. He's not going to use a bridge in Calabasas. You know, he's down here in the low rent district, but. Because it's expensive, is A. Like, why don't you build something for frogs? But if we start planning for frogs, and we start planning for creatures, and really, I hesitate to use this word, but intelligently design the city, I think that's a good future to head for, and I think that's where we're going. So I hope we'll get there.
Question over here.
And a lot of that, I think, when it comes down to it, if we can't get a pedestrian bridge to connect people to the LA River, or connect to you know, to public parks, it's going to be real hard to get towards a bridge.
I'm just going to add really quickly, I think a lot of times flood control is an incredible limiter in all these discussions in terms of what we can and can't do with the LA River. I won't try to even paraphrase that because I've spent most of my time at FoLAR trying to discern what is and isn't possible in conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers as well as the LA County Flood Control District. I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards, but essentially I think the perspective that we always have to keep in mind is that we inherited a storm drain. We inherited a river that was turned into a storm drain system, and it came with incredible benefits. I mean, to this day, we are kept from these incredible storms. We're kept relatively very safe from it, but it came at tremendous cost, and I think that we don't often understand the benefits that we bought. To the river's detriment, to its decay. And I think that if you suddenly, unburden the river, and I think that a lot of us are trying to get to that point where we're doing a sort of better job of holistically managing our water resources, including the river, we'd have to think cautiously through, because now we have 1 million people living next to the LA River in a floodplain. And we haven't had that kind of relationship with the river for decades. And so I think it's something that we have to do carefully, but what inhibits that is oftentimes, the status quo, or doing things as they have been done is very much more comfortable, it's much more safer, I think, economically and politically as well. And so it just takes a movement, a push from people to sort of get that to change.
One quick addition to that is, because of the climate changed future that we're in already, rain events are going to be stronger, and so we really need to look at the river as a flood control plain, because it's going to be deadlier, and we really need to plan around that as well as planning for biodiversity.
And that's kind of the back and forth. I think the primary function of the river remains flood control, and I think that as Melissa was referencing before, we haven't been able to really prove as well what some of these distributed projects could do in terms of providing that same resource. Right now we're saying the river is the one that has to protect us from the water. We're not looking at scale of developments, we're not looking at the issues of density, for example.
Do you mind just very briefly saying, just telling us what is in the master plan and what is in Frank Gary's plan, and what are the big ideas for, recharging the groundwater and holding back water from the river during flood?
So, and Andy could talk about this as well as I could. There's so the city put together a storm drain master plan that looks at sort of an integrated use of managing that stormwater. There's also a county storm drain master plan, stormwater master plan that looks at how do we improve the perviousness of our land in order to better preserve those water resources?